So what we're speaking about today is a case that we're all very familiar with, which is the case of Alec Baldwin and all the things leading up to that situation. Now, the goal of this podcast is, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. I'm going to try to limit the amount of legal input I give, because what I mainly want to focus on that I think is most important is getting to the point of when the shooting started. Before everyone started speaking about Alec Baldwin, there was a lot of things that happened before that as gun guys we should be familiar with. We have a lot of those things that we have to be familiar with to make sure that as gun guys we realize that those were issues that needed to be taken care of, and we need to be very familiar with what went wrong and the basic firearms fundamentals that were not taken care of correctly, which ended up leading to that being a problem. So I have a few friends of mine that said they might join tonight, who are actual lawyers, who might be able to give some feedback or input, legal information. But primarily what I want to focus on is going to be the information of what we have about that case. Now, there is a video I'm going to share with you guys. I'm going to pull up in a second that I want you guys to take a look at. And I want your feedback. So for all the guys who are in the chat, if you're commenting after, because you're seeing this video after, feel free to leave a comment as well. I want to see your feedback in regards to this video, because what this video is going to be is the lawyer of the woman who was the armor in this case. And she was speaking, the attorney was speaking on her behalf, giving input on the whole situation. And in my opinion, for him, clearly not being a gun guy of any kind, it seemed like he was really, in my opinion, incriminating her a lot, because there were a lot of things that he said that I'm like, that's not how that goes. And that's where I think a lot of things got really messy. So I brought some notes just to make sure that I'm going to cover some of the things I want to cover. We're going to speak about some of the terminologies that he used and different things you have to be careful about. And then also being very careful for yourself as a gun guy. If you ever get involved in a shooting, things you have to be very cautious about. So excuse me while I try to set up as best I can the back end of this. And then I'll try to pull this up. Can you give me a second? Okay, so let me know if you guys can see me in the bottom corner. Again, I'm still learning how to use this whole program situation. I'll figure out how that goes. Let's see if I can pull this over here. No, can't pull that over there. Ow. Learning process. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go through some of the footage from the lawyer. I'm going to put in my super cool tactical headphones to see if we're able to see that. And then once I play the audio, again, this is like the first time of me trying to use this setup. So let me know if you're able to see it properly. Let me just go up over here, make sure everything's working on this end. And cool. Great. Okay, so I'm going to play the audio. You guys can let me know if you can still hear it. And then I want to kind of cover the things that he said and why it's like super, super important to hear the things that he said and what we're able to learn from it.
For Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the armorer for the production. Mr. Bowles, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
So this was on Good Morning America. I think this was close to a year ago when this was filmed. This was like right after the event. And Hannah Gutierrez is the lady who is the armorer on the set for when this went down. And this is the attorney that's going to be speaking on her behalf. So I want to give credit to the person conducting this interview, because he asked a lot of really correctly done questions, and he was not holding back. So he asked some very good questions that I want you guys to listen to, and I want you guys to hear how the attorney responded to hear the things that he might have said that as gun people we would look at and be like, no, that's not how that works.
And I want to start with the chain of command of the gun that was used in the fatal shooting. But when the crew broke for lunch, your client told investigators that the guns were locked away, but ammunition was left unsecured on a cart. When production resumed, who handled the gun and who ultimately gave it to Baldwin?
Thank you and good morning. Thank you for having me on. At that point at 11 a.m. that morning, the gun was loaded with dummy rounds. Those are inert rounds incapable of firing.
Okay, so before we go any further into this, I want to see if you guys could tell what's going on here. So there are many, many different types of rounds that are used on movie sets and in real life for training purposes, for demonstration purposes, and for actual live fire. there's a terminology that's often mixed up between dummy rounds and blank firing rounds. Blank rounds are rounds that have gunpowder. They're crimped at the top. And what they're designed to do is be able to actually still fire. They usually add a little bit more gunpowder. So for movie effects, it'll kind of like flash nicer and it looks cooler. But what it does is that it still fires. It could still potentially be lethal depending on how it's going to be used. And it's still able to be used in a real firearm. As an example, this right over here, which I made a video with before, this is the barrel of a can cannon. So what a can cannon is, I'm sure some of you guys have seen the video. What the can cannon is that it uses all these holes over here that when a blank is inside the chamber of the gun, it fires, and all these ports that you could see, all those ports relieve the gases, so it throws out the can out of the barrel. Now you can see the tip of this doesn't have an area for how it's able to eject. The only thing that it's doing is relieving the pressure off to the sides, and that's going to be what causes it to fire. That's an example. There are many different types of barrels and setups that they're able to use. I'm sure a lot of you guys who are watching might have been, or some of you guys I know that are watching currently have been in the military, so you can know about the different muzzle devices they have during training that you're still able to fire blank rounds, but it's not designed to be able to actually have a projectile. So that's going to be an example of a blank round where it's able to still fire, it's able to be used in a real life gun. However, it's not meant to, it's not obviously not designed to be lethal. What he's speaking about, the attorney is speaking about, is something called a dummy round. A dummy round is something like this. This is a 50 caliber round, and this is not real. This is originally from a real 50 caliber round that they removed the gunpowder and they removed the capability for it to fire. But this is a like real metal solid piece of projectile. So this is actually able to be removed, and all that stuff is the same. Now, the difference between a dummy round and a blank is that this is just a piece of metal that they will use, and what they were using on the Rust set, to my understanding, is a dummy round, which means that it was an actual piece of metal, but on revolvers have cylinders. So if you were to point a revolver at someone, the front of the gun, you'd be able to see the protruding rounds pointing out. So what they do for movie sets like that is that they have things that look like real bullets. They also have ones that I believe that are rubber as well, that they pretty much load into the gun, and it's mainly made to look like that there's actually a bullet in there. So it could be a previously real bullet, or it could be just made inert, so it's not able to fire, but it was, again, at some point a real bullet. Or it was like fully CNC machined as one piece of metal and never was a real bullet. Now, the biggest difference is that this one is fake, and this is an example that if I'm going to shake this next to the microphone, you can hear the difference. So listen to this. Okay, that's usually one of the indicators that they use. They put like BBs or something on the inside so that an armor, a trained armor, could do this and identify that this is not a real life round. Now, an actual 50 cal, so this is an actual 50 caliber round. I'll try to be quiet for a second to see if you could hear it. If you're a gun guy and you ever shook any type of round, you could hear the powder moving on the inside. So I'll be quiet for a second. I don't know if you guys heard that or not, but that's going to be actual gunpowder that's inside the projectile, and that's a real actual round. The next thing you might notice is that, again, depending on the scene, if you look over here, this is the fake round, right? Well, let's do this as a test. Which one is this? Okay, you can tell it's ridiculous. I'm going to put this to the camera, and you can see that the back, which is the primer, I don't know if the camera is going to focus right over there. Let's see. You see that little indentation in the center? That there's the outer circle, which is this part right over here, and then there's that inner circle. That inner circle is called the primer. Now, if you look at this one, the primer has been struck. Struck means that it's not able to fire anymore because it's already been impacted and it's now inert. It's not able to fire. On a real 50 cal, so I'm going to pull the real one. Let's hear the difference. Okay. We'll look at the primer on the back over there, and you can see it is whole. There is no impact to the primer. Okay. So this is the real one. This is the fake one. Okay. And you can see the primer difference that looks there. These are small examples of safety measures that are taken on set to ensure the fact that real ammunition is not going to get into a gun during the actual scene. Now, there's other types that you are probably way more familiar with if you're a gun guy. These are another type of dummy rounds. These are also pretty common, right? So you can look at these and you could say that they're visually, physically, in weight and everything, they look entirely different. Now, what these could be used for is that if they still have guns that they don't want the slide to just go back and lock back, you could have those on the gun so the slide remains forward and it still will function similarly to a real gun. But these are going to be in cases where the actual projectile doesn't need to be seen by anyone, so they might use those as well. So that's kind of like an overview, and let's go back to the video. Let me see if I can pull that up for you. Okay, I'm in the corner. All cool. Let's continue.
On the cart, when Hannah came back from lunch, approximately 10 minutes after that, 12 something, she then showed that firearm to Mr. Halls, the assistant director. She spun the cylinder, showed him each of the rounds in that firearm, and then she gave the firearm to Mr. Halls.
Again, already for me, something's off. It doesn't make sense to me, because if they individually examine each round, right, that means that each round would have been rechecked to make sure it isn't live. That means each round should have been shook and reconfirmed. But I'm trying to be picky with the words he's using, where he said she spun the cylinder, which means she might have just gone like zing, right? So the cylinder spins, right? So you can see over here, this part over here is the cylinder. Let's see if I can pull it up right over here. This is the cylinder of the gun. So if you're able to spin those, like free spin those. But the issue again is that just because you're spinning it and you're looking at the back, if in that scene they were using one that still had a fake intact primer, right? Then in that case, that wouldn't have shown anything. That means each round should have been individually removed, shook, and then reinserted, or all of them removed and then insert after each one has been examined so you don't mix up since it's a circle, right? But him saying that they did that and examined it and said they determined it to not be live, I don't know.
At that point, he had the gun. He went into the church. He said he was going to hold it. At that point, Hannah, there was no scene going on. There was no rehearsal. There was tech prep with the cameras. They were trying to...
I'm going to interrupt again. So what he's saying, right, they're trying to put blame on this other guy, right? They're not trying to put blame on this other guy where they're saying, well, he said that he was going to take care of it. He was going to handle it. There wasn't anything going on, right? So if you're the person responsible for firearms on set, it doesn't matter if someone else tells you they're going to take care of it. Your responsibility is the firearm. At what point did she decide that it's okay? That, well, he said he was going to do it. It's okay now.
Set up, figure out where they're going to be. So with nothing going on, Hannah left the church to resume her duties in her prop job.
And by saying that she picked up the gun, she spun the cylinder, are you trying to say that she rechecked the gun before it was given to Alec Baldwin?
She did spin the cylinder. She showed Mr. Halls each of the rounds. There was...
Again, I'm being like maybe overly like picky over here, but the way he paused is he was trying to be careful with the terminology he uses, where he said she spun the cylinder, and then he said kind of like in a halfway that she examined each round. It sounds to me that the rounds were left in the cylinder of the gun when they were examined, because if they removed each one and they shook each round, I find it hard to believe that a person who has any experience with firearms and knows that this is not the sound of gunpowder inside a gun would be able to tell me that. I don't know.
6 dummy rounds that she had loaded into that firearm that she believed had been dummy rounds.
She believed to have been dummy rounds.
She did spin it. She did check it. She did by spinning it, by showing it to Mr. Halls, gave it to Mr. Halls. We then know that he had the firearm in the church, and that firearm then ended up with Mr. Baldwin. It was not given to Mr. Baldwin by Hannah. I believe they went...
It was not given to Mr. Baldwin by Hannah. That's the problem. Isn't her job not to be that she would be the one to hand it to him because of safety reasons? Also, wouldn't she, before handing him the gun, reconfirm safety? Like, I would imagine if you're on set of a potential situation where there's able to be guns used, wouldn't you be overly cautious with these things? As a gun guy, this freaks me out because there's so many levels of caution we take when we're dealing with firearms that this blows my mind. So someone just asked on the chat, do you think they are lying, or it makes sense that she checked it again? I don't think what I think he's doing is he's an attorney. So he's trying to be very careful with the terminology he uses, because if it was later determined that they did examine each round and she still wasn't able to figure out that it was live, that's a huge problem in regards to her professionalism. If they didn't check it at all, then that also shows a really big problem because that would make him much more guilty. And he's throwing it right now in the interview. We have to see what happens next. But right now they're throwing it on the producer that was there, saying that like, well, she checked it and it was good, and now they handed it to him, and they're going to give it to Alec Baldwin, so now it's okay because she did her job. No. I wouldn't. Again, maybe I'm wrong. If you guys are involved in the movie industry, let me know. If your responsibility is the armor, which means that you're responsible for the safety of the firearm, I can't imagine why, again, if this is the case, someone needs to change policy, that the person who's responsible for the gun would give it to anyone else except the actor, and after the scene, take it right back because of safety issues.
To him through Mr. Halls, and that was the chain of custody of that weapon.
And does Hannah know how a live bullet got into that weapon?
No, and I appreciate.
Does she know how? I mean, so here's where I'm going to look at an article after this with you guys. We're going to check out an article. But what it sounded like is that, first of all, on this set, there were discharges of the firearm that happened already. Like, there were multiple discharges that happened throughout the filming of this movie. Besides for that, supposedly, people were using live rounds to target practice during before and in between scenes, which means that, again, as an armor, I cannot comprehend why this would be okay. As an armor, there should never be live ammunition going into a prop gun ever, because it's designated as a prop firearm. I can't comprehend why they think it would be okay that there should be live ammunition anywhere near the creation of this gun if it's going to be designed for use in an environment where it's going to be used for movie practice.
Appreciate you asking that. That's going to be the biggest question in this case, and that's something
I think legally I have to say the word allegedly. This is all alleged. We're just examining here.
Very on, and we're looking at we're going to work closely with law enforcement, do anything we can to cooperate. The FBI is running forensic testing, evidence, DNA and fingerprint. That's going to be critical in terms of who put that live round in the scene. Multiple live rounds, we understand, were recovered, and why. Because the other interesting fact about this, there was a box of labeled dummy rounds that Hannah had been pulling from. She knew were dummy rounds. Somebody put that live round or live rounds in that box. When you do that, you can only have bad intentions.
Okay. Now he's trying to say that it could have been like an intentional either assassination attempt or a method of being able to destroy everything on set. My question is if you're the armor and you're removing dummy rounds from a case that's labeled dummy rounds, are they still not being examined? Let's say a person had ill intent. They had ill intent and they put live rounds in a dummy round casing. Was it not supposed to be examined at the minimum 2 more times before it got in the hands of the actor? So even if there was ill intent, isn't the point of the armor to be able to make sure that if, God forbid, something like this were to happen, they would catch it in advance? Am I missing something? I'm going to check your comments. So live ammo shouldn't be anywhere near the scene or set. Correct. Probably was the setup. Maybe. But again, like, I'm going to take away the ill intent for a second, because let's say there was, right? Individual responsibility of each person. Isn't the armor's job to make sure that there wouldn't end up being a live round? Like, that's why she's being there to check it. That's why she examined it and then she checked it before. So now he's saying that it was, well, someone else did it. It was intentionally put into the gun. Okay, but wasn't she supposed to be the one to catch that? At the end of the day, it wasn't the armor or the producer that killed one and injured another. This shouldn't have taken over a year to put 2 and 2 together. So just to clarify, Joe, right? Are you saying that at the end of the day, the other round of ammunition, meaning the round that were put in for ill intent, that person should be responsible? If that's the case, I agree. But my question still would be on the armor, right? As to why it wasn't caught before it was given. Because there's obviously a very clear difference between a dummy round, right, like we just showed, and a live round, which should have been examined. Live round. But yeah, I'm not saying that there aren't either more people guilty or that these two aren't guilty. I'm just trying to say, as the gun guy, right, looking at the order of operations of how it got to this point, how many things went wrong, and for us to learn from it. I think that's a really important thing, because you only get these kind of examples in real life, and it's very important to us to be able to learn from these things.
Because you're going to confuse the rounds if you're the armorer, and they appear very similarly.
I'm sorry, I keep pausing. If they appear, okay, you guys know what I'm going to say at this point. If they appear very similarly, but they have indicators to show that they're not real or that they are, that should have been examined and proven and taken into account by the armor.
The dummy rounds look like a regular live round.
So you're saying that it could have been purposely done?
We are looking at that possibility. We're afraid that could have been what happened here, that somebody intended to sabotage this set with a live round intentionally placed in a box of dummies. Otherwise, you wouldn't, first of all, you wouldn't bring a live round on the set. But second of all, why do you place that in the box labeled dummies that the armor is...
So someone just commented that Alec Baldwin at the end of the day is the one who pulled the trigger, so he is responsible. I'm not saying not. Again, what we're trying to do here is determine, before it ever got into his hands, right, before it ever got there, we're going to speak about him also, right? But before it ever got there, what was able to be done, or what could have been monitored and taken care of before this ever happened to reduce the likeliness of this becoming an issue?
Going to be pulling from. Everybody knows they're going to be getting them from there. Why would you do that other than to try to cause some incident on the set? Now, we're not saying anybody had any intent there was going to be a tragedy, a homicide, but they wanted to do something to cause a safety incident on set. But that's what we believe happened.
And that's a very, very serious allegation. Do you have any evidence to support that?
Well, the biggest evidence we have is that there is a box of dummies and there's live rounds within that box. We know Hannah did not put the live rounds.
Okay, now that's already doesn't make sense. That's not fair. Because what he's saying is that, first of all, he was saying that someone was trying to damage the set or make a scene in regards to firearm safety or whatever it is. But Hannah's not the one who put it in. But we still don't know how the round got there. So he's saying that the evidence he has is that she's not the one who put it into the box and that there were live rounds there. That's not evidence for the fact that someone had ill intent. Not ill intent. It could have been irresponsible, but not ill intent, right? Because if, again, allegedly, if they had people that were actually practicing with live ammunition, just target practicing nearby, right? Because it was a unique gun and they wanted to do that, that's a problem. So...
in that box. We know the live rounds shouldn't have been in that box, but they were. So there can be very, very few explanations.
So I want to point this out. Someone just commented, as an actor, there is a responsible assumption other people are doing their jobs. You're right. So again, we're going to speak about Alec Baldwin in a second. So that's why we're starting from the beginning. Like, before the gun ever got to him, right? We're already seeing so many issues building up. So let's continue.
For why live rounds end up in a box of dummy prop ammunition on a movie set. And one of them is that somebody wants that to go into a firearm and they wants that to be an incident on the set. There's no other reason to mix a live round with the dummies. There's just none.
And you said that Hannah handed the AD the gun and she left the church. So the gun was in the church without Hannah.
It was in the church without Hannah. That is correct.
If any of you are actors and have been a part of any firearm safety protocol on a set, right? I want to know if that's a problem. Is a armor allowed to leave the set if they're responsible for the firearms and the firearm safety, and just assume that other people on the set would be knowledgeable in the firearm safety rules and confirming that they're not live rounds of ammo? Because if that's not the case, that still is a problem to me. At this point, I'm not blaming her anymore. I'm wondering about movie policies in sets and stuff like that, because that sounds absolutely ridiculous to me.
And she didn't believe there was anything happening at that point. There was no rehearsal. There was no scene going on. It was a tech prep where the cameras were setting up, positioning. So there was not supposed to be happening. Had they called her in, and usually they do, they call Hannah in and they say, we're about to do a scene involving a firearm. She'll go in, she'll re-instruct Mr. Baldwin on the safety features, what he's doing in this shot. She'll go through the gun again, she'll inspect it again, and that's how it worked on this set. Well, she wasn't called back because there wasn't a scene, there wasn't a shot. In terms of the movie.
Well, investigate.
I want to pause really quick and say something random, but I think it's important because we have actual viewers here. First of all, I appreciate all of you guys who are viewing right now. I want to point out that last live that we did, a lot of you guys donated money and we put it towards people who are suffering with mental health, because in the firearms world, obviously, suicide is unfortunately a very big part, and depression is a very big part of the statistics for people dying with firearms. So as an update to that video, I took the amount of money that everyone has donated it, I doubled it, and I donated it to the Nest Center in California, which is an organization that helps with families with struggling with depression or having family issues, or people who are at risk of suicide and things like that. So just as an update to what happened there, it's because of you guys that we were able to actually make that donation happen, and I really appreciate it. Just wanted to throw it out there.
They say they found 500 rounds of ammunition on set, including blanks, as you said, dummy rounds and live rounds. Why were there live rounds on the set in the first place?
And that's the biggest question in the whole case. The blanks, as you know, Michael, they are designed to, they're crimped at the end. They don't resemble a live bullet. They fire off powder. They just are for sound and
Okay, another question for you guys. I'm kind of backing up for what we were speaking about here, but would any of you hand someone a firearm who doesn't have knowledge the way you do in rules of firearm safety and just leave? Like, again, as gun guys, we always treat a gun as if it's loaded. And if I'm handing a firearm to someone who doesn't know how to use a firearm, I would never leave, because I don't think that they know how to handle it to the way that they should. So why would I risk doing that? So for me, again, if the protocol is that she is responsible for firearm safety on set, the fact that she left alone, if there's a protocol, that alone is neglect, and that's a problem.
the look of the powder coming out. The dummy rounds resemble a live round. They've got a projectile tip. That's what their purpose is. When the camera looks at them in a revolver, it looks like a real round. There is no purpose for a live round in this set, zero. And Hannah made that cut. There was no reason for there to be live rounds. She didn't have live rounds. She didn't purchase any of this ammunition. This ammunition was purchased by other people, production. So whoever brought these live rounds on set was wrong, and I think they had a bad intention. That's what we believe.
Well, there are reports that crew members use prop guns from the set for live target practice. Does your client have any?
Aha! Allegedly. Allegedly, though. It's allegedly.
Any knowledge of that?
She never saw anything like that. She doesn't
Wait a second.
believe that happened.
Wait a second. Let's go back.
Crew members use prop guns from the set for live target practice. Does your client have any knowledge of that?
Does that look like a smirk almost? Like as if he knew that they might. I'm not allegedly. I'm using allegedly. Does that cover me from all legal issues? But that I've heard a lot of people say that, which it makes sense to me. That makes sense to me. I'm not saying it's right, but it makes sense to me that someone was dumb enough that they got live ammo. They're like, oh, these are real guns. They're able to fire. We're in the middle of nowhere. Let's just take a couple rounds out over here. Already, I was told that there was, from what I heard, there was a lot of safety neglect in general on set. Apparently, people might have even walked out because of the safety requirements or whatever it might have been. That makes sense to me. But that's not something that he would ever say, because that would be a problem for his client, wouldn't it?
She never saw anything like that. She doesn't believe that happened. I don't know who's saying that, but we don't believe that happened. She certainly never saw it. She was extremely safety conscious on this set. She did her best to train people. She was given limited training days. She trained Alec Baldwin one-on-one on a...
Okay. If you're hiring someone to be an armorer, wouldn't you want someone who's being proficient? He can't now say that they hired her, because she did her best, No, but if that's your job, if you're hiring for a job and you get hired, it's not only the responsibility. If I hire you to be a doctor and all your credentials clear out, because she might have had the correct government legal credentials to say that she's an armorer, but it doesn't mean that in actual safety she's as good as she wants us to be, right? Because we all know plenty of guys who might have NRA certification to be an instructor, but it might not be the guy we still want to train us, right? If you're the person who still ultimately causes the problem, you're still responsible. Did I just make sense? I don't know. This is all still very crazy to me.
She did her best to ensure nobody...
Also, by the way, guys are talking on the chat right now about state-to-state legalities, meaning some states, which is true, might have different requirements for a protocol. That could be the case. But still, this is something that, safety-wise, this is a huge, huge problem, clearly.
Ever pointed a firearm at anybody on the set, and that was one of her things. Don't point it at a human being. But she did her best on that. She never saw anybody target practicing.
Who else on set would have access to the guns, and why?
There were 3 people that had access to those guns in the prop truck, and that was Hannah, Sarah, who was the prop master, and another assistant. They had the code to the safe. The firearm would be locked in the safe. Now, the ammunition was not locked up. The ammunition was out because it was dummy rounds, everybody believed, and blanks. Neither of which.
You guys tell me in the comments, if you're the armor on a set, would you leave blank rounds of ammunition out? I would never, because they're still able to be extremely dangerous for a person who doesn't know how to handle them. So for me, if a firearm is fake, but you're the armor, or if the ammunition is fake, but you're the armor, you treat it like a real gun. And if you're going to say like, why, that sounds too intense. Clearly someone died. Did someone not die because of this? And this could have been prevented because of basic firearm safety?
Was locked up or secured. So that box of dummy rounds, it was capable of being tampered with. And we believe that's what occurred.
And in your statement, you said Hannah was hired for 2 jobs, which made it hard for her to focus on her armorer duties. And since she had only worked on 1 feature film before this one, was she too experienced to handle the work? Inexperienced to handle the work.
I would say no. Yes, sir. No, I would say no. And the reason is her father, a longtime person in this industry, Thel Reed, very well respected. He taught her literally from the age of 10, taking her on sets, teaching her about firearm safety. She is actually very experienced. We talked to her at length yesterday.
Do you see how he's struggling, going back and forth between it's not her fault she didn't know, but she's experienced and she's knowledgeable. If she was experienced and she was knowledgeable, she should have caught it. Am I missing something? Look, as an attorney, good for him, because he's riding that line because he does not have much to work with. But him going back and forth is crazy, because you're just looking at this like, come on, this interview sounds like a disaster.
She knows firearms, she knows safety, she knows the principles, she knows how to do. This is not about her being inexperienced. It's about a production set where they didn't give the resources. They didn't have, she wasn't a full-time armorer. They didn't pay her for that. They didn't have her on that. And it's the way they wanted to allocate resources and the emphasis on profitability, frankly, over safety. That's really what the case is.
Mr. Bowles, we appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, appreciate you.
You guys tell me, man. You tell me. I'm going to show you guys another article in a second, but I'm curious to hear feedback on this, because this was a 9-minute interview, not even, an 8-minute interview, where it sounded like such a disaster, because for him riding the line in regards to her not really being fully up to par, because, it wasn't her fault. She wasn't really well trained, but she was really well trained because, she has a lot of experience, even though she only did 1 feature film. By the way, there is obviously a difference between like movie firearms policy and movie firearms training versus real life, but there are still protocols that have to be in place that this wouldn't have happened. If you're going to be, now by the way, here's another thing. I thought at some point, maybe there are certain variations of this that exist, but maybe not in all cases, because I'm sure they perform differently. I would have thought that certain blank barrels or certain blank systems that they would have wouldn't allow a projectile to go through, even if a round accidentally gets loaded in. I could be wrong, but I feel like that is a safety feature that exists. It's similar to, if any of you guys ever did like simunition training or UTM training, the simunition is simulated ammunition. It's not a real projectile, but it can't be loaded, or a real projectile, real bullet would not be able to be loaded into the firearm because of the way that the barrel and mechanism was designed. So it's kind of like an additional safety feature. They might have been using like older guns that maybe it's harder to modify. I'm not using that as like a standard example, but like these are all kind of like safety things that you'd think could be implemented or would be implemented to some degree to prevent something like this from happening. I'm going to check out the comments that you guys are putting so I can see what's happening here. Rabbi, he's lying to protect his client. He's saying he's doing his job. Like we can't say he's not doing his job, but the reason why this interview is crazy to me is because if I was the client, or us watching this right now, right, we're looking at this and saying, as gun guys, this has a lot of red flags. As it sounds crazy to me. It sounds crazy to me that there would be this many red flags. So there's an article here also. I'll pull up right now, right? And this is an article that was put up by the New York Times. Let's see if I can move it over for you guys. Okay. So this is going to be the article that was put out about Alec Baldwin. And this is January 31st, 2023, because this, I believe, was after they were actually charged We're not going to go through the whole thing. I'm going to skip around here and there. I just want to touch on a few points that were brought up in the article that I thought was interesting. So the actor Alec Baldwin, by the way, here's the other thing, right? Immediately starts off the actor Alec Baldwin, right? He's right now a hot topic name, right? They're talking less about Hannah Gutierrez because Hannah Gutierrez Reeds, is that her full name? Reed, right? Because he's the guy who's like main interest. But what's still crazy to me is that the armor is still such a high profile person in this case, meaning for involvement, right? But like, if you're the actor, you're the one who's getting in trouble here. Again, we're going to speak about Alec Baldwin. We're going to speak about the things he said and did, but like we're just going step by step here to make sure. Okay. Okay. The actor Alec Baldwin has been charged with involuntary manslaughter for the shooting on set of the Western that killed the film's cinematographer and wounded its director. Okay. Now, let's see if I'm going to pull up I'm going to just bear with me as I go through some of this quickly. Should never have pointed at anyone. Okay, so one of the things they mentioned is that the actor should have never pointed the firearm at anyone. Now, again, I don't know what the policy is. I find it hard to believe that that's actually what happened because although, you know what this is? This is similar to having like a waiver at any amusement park you might go to or any kind of like activity you take. However, if a person does something, they're not necessarily going to say anything. But if you do it and you get in trouble, you get hurt, well, it was on our waiver. It was on our policy that they shouldn't have done it. I mean, my opinion is that if they were doing, so let's go through this. What was the shot they were trying to take here? They were using dummy rounds of ammunition. If they're using dummy rounds, that means the projectile is going to be visible. So for that scene, they want the projectile to look like they wanted to use a dummy round and not a blank round because you'd be able to identify it if it was a blank round as being not real, versus in this scene, they were trying to get an image of the dummy round. So what that meant was that at some point, the gun either had to pass by the camera or get very close to the camera to be able to see to the front of the cylinder to identify that shot, right? So that's going to be the shot that they wanted. Otherwise, they wouldn't have used those kind of rounds necessarily, right? Now, what that means is someone had to have been muzzled. Someone had to have been muzzled. They also usually practice these like things over and over again. Like you're not going to just do one shot of a scene because if anything's wrong, then you don't have duplicates. And for movie sets, they'll do it multiple times, right? So he was doing, I believe it was a cross draw, and the cross draw, cross draw means that like let's say if you're right-handed, right? And it's going to be in your left shoulder, you'll pull it out across your body, cross draw, okay? That's an example from the shoulder. It could be from the other side of your pants, whatever, just the concept, right? So he was doing it like that, and then he was firing, which is also a very Western movie kind of thing to do, is that you draw across and fire. And that's when he discharged the gun. Now, let's see over here. I know that at some point, that they mentioned that Alec Baldwin claimed that he never pulled the trigger. And then the FBI even did an examination afterwards with the firearm and said that's not true. Like it had to have been pulled. The gun was not able to fire without the trigger being pulled. But let's see here. Here we go. On October 21st, 2021, Mr. Baldwin was rehearsing a scene that involved cross-drawing a revolver and pointing it towards the camera lens. But it shouldn't have been pointed at anyone. No, but it makes sense that the movie would require him to do that because it's a good visual if it was safe. but it was not, right? Joel, the film director, told a detective investigating the shooting, according to the court papers, the Bonanza Creek Ranch set was inside a structure depicting a 19th century wooden church. So that was going to be, again, the set, old Western style. The gun discharged and a bullet struck Mrs. Hutchins in the chest and Mr. Souza in the shoulder. Excuse my pronunciation of the names. Now, she was taken to the hospital. She did not make it. He survived with a gunshot wound to the shoulder. By the way, side note, I would also be curious to know about the medical procedures on the set, like just in general. I think that'd be interesting to hear about. Because she ended up being airlifted, but I wonder who, or by the way, if there was medical people on set that were able to deal with trauma, I wonder what kind of gunshot impact it was. That chest seals might not have helped, or being able to control the bleeding. Just as a side note, that'd be interesting for me to learn about dealing with the gunshot wound, because also since they weren't anticipating there being a live round being fired, were the medics prepared for gunshot wounds specifically? I'm just going to look at the chat really quick to see. if any of you guys said anything. Ghost gun. It was a ghost because he didn't pull the trigger. The gun just, this is an example that he's been living by. Guns kill people. Guns kill people. That's why we're banning guns. Not people, we're banning guns. At least, to the very end of his career, he stuck with the fact that guns kill people, which is why he's completely innocent, right? Now, there are criminal charges. I think it was like up to 18 months, right? Here, look. The more serious one included a firearm enhancement and mandatory 5-year sentence, with another charge carries a sentence of up to 18 months for involuntary manslaughter. Okay, so now let's see here. Mr. Baldwin has repeatedly denied pulling the trigger and said that he believed the gun did not have ammunition in it. Now, here's where people are going to get upset at me. To a certain extent, I believe him. The reason why, again, don't freak out just yet. The reason why is because I can't expect a guy like Alec Baldwin, who is majorly anti-gun, there's no way had proper firearms training. And also, let's say he did have proper firearms training. If it was from this Reed lady, right, Hannah Gutierrez, there is no chance that she gave him enough firearm safety background to be able to actually know what he was looking for and to be careful about it. So I believe the fact that he did not think that there was live ammunition in the gun, because why would he? I'm not saying he's not responsible. I'm not saying that he didn't do something wrong. What I'm saying, though, is that knowledge-wise, I would believe the fact that he did not expect or know that there was, an actual live round in the gun. It makes sense to me. Now, when he said I didn't pull the trigger, I don't know. Right? Now, let's see here if we pull that out. Yeah, pull the trigger. And the FBI analysis on the gun showed that Mr. Baldwin absolutely, just highlighting that one word, emphasis, absolutely pulled the trigger, adding that the prosecutors waited to move forward with the charges until they received that report. Wow. Now, I'm trying to see if there was more. There was something else I think I wanted to point out in regards to the information. Let's see here. According to the affidavit, Mr. Halls, who had previously been the subject of complaints about the regard for safety protocols on set, told an investigator that after the armorer opened the gun for him to inspect, he did not check all the rounds as he should have before handing it to Mr. Baldwin. That makes sense to me. Because again, any professional armorer, right, and any person who has a basic knowledge on, by the way, you don't have to be a gun guy, right, if you work on a movie set, to identify this as not being real. They make this foolproof. For this reason, they want it to be foolproof so people don't die, right? So if they individually removed each round and examined each round and went like this to each individual round, I find it hard to believe that they wouldn't have found it, right? So that makes sense to me. I believe the fact that they didn't check every single round, because if they did, if you're telling me that they did and a round still was in there, that shows incredible incompetence on the armor, does it not? Okay, so I'm going to throw it back to you guys, right? I want to hear your feedback. So I'm going to look at the chat right now, see if you guys have any questions or input. There's no way he didn't pull the trigger. According to the FBI, you're right, because they examined it, and I find it very hard to believe. I have one more video I want to show you guys. I'm sure you guys are going to be familiar with who this guy is. He's a very knowledgeable dude when it comes to movie production and props. He gives a really cool rundown in regards to blank firing rounds and dummy rounds and live rounds. So we're going to watch it in a second. I just want to see, get some input from you guys. Yes, to my understanding, someone just wrote, there is a bunch of YouTubers who made videos with the same gun demonstrating how it's impossible to have been fired without the trigger being pulled. So they know the exact make and model of the firearm. They were able to do it. It's actually right over here. If I pull you guys back into the screen, right? Right over there, right? It says it was a .45 long Colt revolver made by the Italian manufacturer. I don't know how to pronounce that, but yeah, there were plenty of guys who actually owned the gun. And then I lost you guys for a second. Wait a second. Here we go. There we go. So they tested it, examined it, and there was no chance that it was able to be fired without the gun going on. Like there was no chance that it was able to be fired without the trigger being pulled. Oh yeah, so Brandon Herrera made a really good video on it. Yeah. Again, so here's my current take. Yes, ultimately, Alec Baldwin is responsible to some degree because he did end up killing someone, right? It's involuntary manslaughter, but that's what happened, right? Hannah Gutierrez, in my opinion, should be the prime person that's responsible for this situation. This is my opinion because she's the one responsible for firearm safety on set. Second to that would be the producer because he should also have a basic understanding of how to determine that this is not real, right? And then goes, so first, second, and third. For the top award, right? Hannah Gutierrez Reed, right? Second place, the producer. Third place, Alec Baldwin. They're all responsible, but I want to just clarify the extent of responsibility, right? For an armorer, a person who's the person hired for firearm safety on set, that's ridiculous to me. Okay, so let's go to the other video I wanted to show you guys. I actually think it's very interesting. This is going to be the movie props guy that I think does a really cool job. I'm sure you guys are familiar with him. He's a really, really cool guy to watch. And let's listen to, this is a 2-minute video breakdown on the difference between dummy rounds and blank rounds and just display rounds, things like that.
Dummy bullets for film and television. Dummy rounds are actually very safe. There's no way they can go off. The only way to hurt somebody with them is like throw it really hard at their head. What makes them dangerous is they look so much like a real bullet. Now there are several different types of dummies that we use for different circumstances. When we're loading a weapon, like say an AR-15, we'll use this with good primers. When I say good primers, that means there's no dimpled primer. It looks like a live primer. Now this is actually machined. It's all one piece. The telltale sign to prove that it's a dummy is, you hear this?
Are we all familiar with that sound now? That's a telltale sign to identify it as being a dummy round. They still put something in it because they want to make sure that it doesn't end up becoming a problem.
There's a ball bearing inside, and that's how we know. Now the reason we put a ball bearing in like that is because a real bullet, this is a blank, but it sounds like a real bullet would. You shake it, you don't hear anything.
For a place that you're going to be on set, it might be about volume, but you should also be able to feel. Like I feel the gunpowder moving in there, but you could also hear it. But on set, it makes sense that they put a ball bearing because it's much more distinguishable in sound.
The dummy you do. When we don't need to see the end of the cartridge, we'll use these that have the dimpled primer. Now a primer is this little round circle in the middle, and it's dimpled. That means it's been expended and then turned into a dummy round.
Some dummies even have holes drilled in the side for an added layer of identification.
In addition to using dummies to show bullets loaded into a gun, they're also used as decoration in bandoliers and gun belts. They're also used when you're using a revolver, looking down the barrel to see the bullets in the cylinder.
He made this video, by the way, right after the situation took place because he's the guy that people looked at as like the movie prop guy. So they were kind of looking for answers, right? And he's a good guy to speak to. And he's using this example exactly because that's what happened, right? In the scene that they were talking about with Alec Baldwin, there was going to be a gun pointed at the screen to some degree where you could see the projectile. And since you could see the projectile, they're going to be using dummy rounds so that it doesn't ruin the effect and the feeling of the scene by seeing that it's not actually going to be a live round.
This is a revolver with an empty cylinder, and this is a revolver with dummy.
Perfect. Here's a great example, right? So we could see right over here, right? This is going to be what a cylinder of a revolver looks like. So you see the protruding round. So this is the cylinder, this thing right over here. So when you see that, if you saw that clearly it was a blank, then it kind of ruins the effect, right? And also if it was something like, let's see if you guys could see me, something like that, where it's clearly like red and distorted in color, that doesn't help the effect either.
Rounds. And here I'd use the dimpled dummies because you'll never see the end of the casing. This loaded magazine is actually just a solid piece of rubber that can be used to load into a pistol.
Dummy ammo.
Side note, I wonder how long those rubber ones last, because for you guys knowing that when you load ammunition to the magazine, the strain is pretty strong. So I wonder if it like could tear or something over time. But yeah, very interesting that they have that as an option.
Ammo should be shown the same respect as a live round or a blank. But as long as proper protocol is followed and you have an experienced staff, the actors and crew will be safe.
Input? What do you guys think? Okay, so as a sum
Welcome
up,
to Scott
right?
Prop and Roll. Today we're going to talk about
as a sum up, right, for what we spoke about today, there's a lot of people guilty here. There's a lot of people guilty here. What I'm just trying to emphasize is that just because the main actor is someone that the firearms world doesn't like, or in general, just being an actor, so he's a good title to highlight things with, he's not the only person responsible, right? There's other people, and as gun guys, we need to be serious about this, because the issue is not going to be the actor, right? Because they're just going to say, well, there was ammunition. Isn't there someone supposed to be professionals? Like, what's going on? We need to take people responsible for firearms, who were responsible for the firearms and ammunition. They need to be taken accountable, because this is a very bad look for guys who are very serious about guns. I'm sure the majority of you, if I'm going to look at the comments, right? The majority of you would never leave ammunition around with someone who doesn't know how to handle it. You would not leave a firearm around, empty or not empty, right? Around with someone who is not familiar with the safety protocol of firearms. This was all stuff that was done. The ammunition was not examined. It was not examined thoroughly. It wasn't examined multiple times. And even if it was, that shows an incompetence and on the knowledge base of the person who was hired to do that job. And that's a very big problem. I'm going to stay one more minute, see if I can read any of your guys' comments in the comment section. And then we'll go from there. He managed to break every firearm rule in around 2 seconds. Let's go through the firearms rules together and see what was broken. Treat every firearm as if it was loaded. Never point a firearm at anything you wouldn't want destroyed. Keep your finger off the trigger until you have intent of firing. If you have intent of firing, beware of what's in the foreground and background of your target before the gun discharges. Yeah, that's not a good look, is it? In the real world, if I hand you a gun and tell you it's blanks, and you do what he did, you're going to jail for negligence. The courts don't care if you knew if it was real or dummy rounds. True. Saying that is true. Again, like I'm clarifying. I'm not saying he's not guilty. I'm just trying to put more emphasis on the person who could have prevented all this from the beginning, as opposed to Alec Baldwin, who's not expected to know safety like the guy who's hired as the armorer. This is what happens when you give someone who's against guns and has no idea how they work a gun. Something like this happens. It's funny, by the way, as a guy like him who's such an anti-gun like activist dude, that this is the end of his career. Like, this is what caused it. Okay. Please feel free to comment on the video. This video will be uploaded later for you guys to be able to rewatch if you wanted to. Really appreciate you guys joining. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys have feedback on either the really cool production value or interest on like another topic you want discussed, I think this was very interesting because it shows us safety things that happen in real life that we need to be aware of, that we need to be watching out for, and things that we can learn from. These are very much learn from it moments, and I think it's really cool for us to be able to highlight them and speak about them. So if you guys have another case or something, feel free to reach out, send me links, whatever it might be, and maybe we'll be able to put one of those together. Again, really appreciate you guys joining.